Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Holyobar-Walker, and I serve as the Director of Learning Programs here at the Emory Alumni Association. We're excited to have you here. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping announcements for today's session. Please note that the chat is disabled. However, Dr. Quave is looking forward to hearing from you. Please submit any questions you may have during the Q&A portion of our program by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. Now, I will turn it over to Taylor McNair, co-chair of the Emory Alumni Environmental Network, to kick us off.
Thanks, Nicole. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Taylor McNair, a 2016 environmental science and business graduate from Emory, and I'm proud to serve as co-chair of the Emory Alumni Environmental Network here in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Emory Alumni Environmental Network seeks to connect alumni with a shared interest in preserving our environment through identifying and encouraging careers in sustainability. We aim to connect alumni with each other, Emory faculty, and students who share a passion for protecting the environment, providing a platform to exchange ideas and advice, as well as relevant programming and networking opportunities around the world. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our guest tonight, Dr. Cassandra Quave. Dr. Cassandra Quave is curator of the Herbarium and Associate Professor of Dermatology and Human Health at Emory University, where she leads anti-infective drug discovery research initiatives and teaches courses on medicinal plants, microbiology, and pharmacology. As a medical ethnobotanist, her work focuses on the documentation and biochemical analysis of plants used in traditional medicine. Dr. Quave's research is supported by the NIH, industry contracts, and philanthropy. She's a fellow of the Explorers Club, a past president of the Society for Economic Botany, a recipient of the Emory Williams Teaching Award, and the Charles Heiser Jr. Mentor Award. She's also the host of Foodie Pharmacology, a podcast dedicated to exploring the links between food and medicine. Dr. Quave has authored more than 100 scientific publications, 2 edited books, and 7 patents. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Cassandra Quave.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And it's great to be here tonight with the Emory Alumni Network, not only as a member or current member of the Emory faculty, but also as an alumnus myself. I actually graduated in 2000 with a degree in biology and anthropology. So welcome to everyone that's joined us tonight. I'm going to be telling a bit about my book, The Plant Hunter. And I wanted to start out with this very short reading of the dedication of the book, because I think this will really resonate with many of you in the audience. And it's dedicated to this: for the knowledge keepers and the wisdom seekers who delight in nature's beauty and revel in its complexity. And I think for anyone that is passionate about the environment, this is something that likely resonates with you. And so I'm going to walk you through a bit of the book. This is a memoir, so it's a personal story of my journey in science, my journey in becoming a scientist, and uniquely my journey as a disabled woman, mother, and wife in this process. So I'll start with the beginning. I was quite a surprise for my parents. This is my dad and my mom here in the center, and there I am. And I was born in the 1970s at a time when it wasn't very typical to have a lot of early evaluation of throughout the pregnancy, a lot of ultrasound detection. And so when I was born, there were a number of surprises. I was missing a number of bones in my right leg. My tibia was short, my fibula was missing, and my femur was also very short. And so from a very young age, basically from the day I was born, I was placed immediately into casts and later into these kind of supportive orthotic devices with pretty serious heels here to help me find balance between those limb disparities. And these early experiences in medicine really shaped my life in a number of ways. And in this book, I tell that story and how it shaped my trajectory as a scientist. And so at the age of 3, because of these issues with my bone deformities, a decision was made to amputate my right leg in the hope that I could walk more efficiently with a prosthetic limb. Unfortunately, like many people still today, I contracted a life infection from staph bacteria. So it was an infection of staph, and I also had gangrene in the limb. And so I was sent home, unbeknownst to my parents or the physicians, that I had this infection. And when it was, I was rushed back to the hospital and had to have a number of revisions. And so ever since then, I've really had difficulty in ambulating because I don't have much tissue under that bone. It's just the barest amount of scar tissue beneath the bone, whereas normal amputees would have a nice thick tissue to add a cushion. But that didn't stop me. I was always a very curious kid. And even though I was in and out of the hospital 1 or 2 times a year for a number of different orthopedic surgeries, I was always outdoors. My love as a child was really spending time outdoors with my dog, exploring the world around me, and whether it was climbing a tree and looking at all the ants and epiphytes that were around that tree, or looking deeper into the water to understand what types of life forms survived in ditch water or pond water, or later in the saliva of our horse or of our dog or cow, or even the human mouth. That was where my curiosity really lied. And growing up disabled, I didn't have that many opportunities to engage in competitive sports. This is in a time when there weren't that many opportunities for children that had mobility impairments. And so where I found my real love was in science fair. Now, if we were in a open room, everyone in person, I would ask everyone in the audience to raise their hands and say, how many of you loved the science fair and how many of you dreaded it? Usually it's the parents in the audience who say that they dreaded it because oftentimes kids would wait till the last minute to pull their projects together. But for me, science fair was just this amazing gateway into this incredible world where I could expand upon these creative ideas. I could ask questions. I could apply tools that I had just learned about to answer those questions. And so my experiments evolved from these early evaluations of what life existed in pond water or in the saliva of different animals to questions that were more relevant to medicine, like how high was the load of bacteria in different producers of ground beef? Or what happens when you expose bacteria found on implanted medical devices like urinary tract catheters? What happens when you expose those over and over again to antibiotics? And how fast, how quickly can antibiotic resistance evolve? And so I spent much of my young childhood balanced between these science fair experiments, but also I spent a lot of time in the local emergency room. I was fascinated by medicine, both from the perspective of being a patient, a frequent patient. I had many frequent flyer miles in the hospital from all of the surgeries that were required to kind of repair my body throughout my childhood. And I got really interested in understanding what it was like to be on the other side of the curtain. And so I spent a lot of time volunteering in the local emergency department in a very small town. And there I saw all the different phases of life and death. And based on that, based on those experiences, I decided to actually apply to Emory. It was the school I applied to. I was early decision. And I've never regretted it. It was the right decision for me because it really gave me this amazing insight into a world that went well beyond just my early understandings of what medicine is. Because before I came to Emory, I didn't understand that medicine in different cultures could be different. My understanding of medicine as a child was always that it was founded in pharmacy and surgery, and there was nothing beyond that. There was nothing in between that. And through taking courses in anthropology and cultural anthropology and medical anthropology, I started to understand that medicine and health was about a lot more than pharmacy and surgery. It had to do with spirituality. It had to do with the ways that culture shapes how we view not only our state of health, but also how we view the disabled identity, and also how we view the environment in which we live. And it was in one of these courses that I was exposed for the first time to this field of ethnobotany. It was a course in tropical ecology. A class that met once a week, taught by Dr. Larry Wilson in the biology department. And we read this book, and it was just one unit on this idea. But for me, it was really life-changing because I was a double biology and anthropology major with a love of medicine and this parallel love of science and nature. And all of a sudden, these two seemingly were disparate fields across the humanities and the hard sciences came together in ethnobotany. Now, for those of you that have never heard of the term ethnobotany or ethnobiology, these are terms that refer to the ways that scientists can understand how humans relate to the natural world. And so when it comes to ethnobotanist, what we focus on is the study of how people use plants for everything from food to medicine to shelter, clothing, instruments, in all the different ways, basically, that you can possibly imagine that plants might be useful to humans. And it's also been defined as the science of survival, because without our knowledge of how to use these natural resources, we couldn't survive in all the different habitats in which humans exist. And so here I was at the end of my junior year of college. And after taking this course in tropical ecology, I was still very much pre-med, still very much determined to go to medical school. I was taking the MCATs and getting ready for all of that. But there was this curious fire that had become stoked in me. And I decided that I just had to go to the Amazon. And now thinking about it in retrospect, I'm like, wow, that was a pretty bold decision, especially with my number of medical conditions, but it was just something I knew at my core that I needed to do. And so the day after my 21st birthday, I jumped on a plane, and with help and a letter of introduction from my professor, from Dr. Wilson, I made my way down to the northeastern part of Peru in the city of Iquitos. And from there, I took a riverboat upriver, up the Amazon, the Napa River, towards the border, where I ended up staying at the Explorama camps and lodges to work as basically an intern research helper in the botanical gardens there. My first experiences in Peru were in the city in Iquitos, and I was amazed by all the different plants that were being sold. I mean, this was medicine that was being sold to local people. But what was most eye-opening for me were my interactions with Don Antonio. Don Antonio was a traditional healer, but he was employed as the garden caretaker who I was sent to work under during my time as an intern there. And what he really illustrated to me time and time again during this period of working with him was that, again, medicine was about much more than just pharmacy and surgery. It was about these connections that humans have with each other and the connections that we hold with nature. And based off of this experience, when I got back to Atlanta and I had my acceptance letter after 2 trips in the Amazon, I went in the summer and also in the winter break, I just knew that it wasn't meant for me. I wasn't meant to practice medicine. I was meant to study and understand these traditional systems of medicine with the hopes of developing new medicines from this wisdom. Now, I know today that plants are integral to global health care. We know that they can constitute the main pharmacopoeia, or the main body of medicine, for 70 to 95% of people living in most developing countries. What's equally amazing is that out of the roughly 374,000 species of plants that we know that exist on Earth today, roughly 33,000 species, 9% of all plants, have been used in some system of medicine historically and also currently as a major form of medicine. Now, what's most surprising to me today as a scientist is that the fact that we really haven't bothered to look at most of those 33,000 species. We've maybe taken a rigorous look at the very low hundreds. there's a lot out there for us to study. And there's a lot out there for us to really document and conserve before they're lost forever, because these plants are also under risk from habitat loss, pressures from climate change, overharvesting, and more. Now, why should we care about medicinal plants? I mean, beyond their incredible utility to local people that rely on these as their main form of medicine, a lot of our modern medicines have actually been built on the backbone of this set of knowledge. If you look at the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines, many of these therapies were actually built off of or derived from directly from medicinal plants that were used in some system of medicine for medical care. So whether it's for pain, for heart disease, for cancer, for infection, the list goes on and on. And it's very clear to me now, as someone that specializes in this and has a good grasp of the history of plants and medicine, that modern medicine as we know it today would not have been possible without this basis of traditional medicine. Now, some of the things that I'm concerned with are the threats that many of these medicinal plants are. We are currently facing a biodiversity crisis where 2 in 5 plants are estimated to be threatened with extinction. We're also facing a linguistic crisis where many of the indigenous languages, where much of this traditional knowledge that's been shared over millennia from generation to generation is under threat. We're losing the languages, and we're also losing with those languages the knowledge of these unique environments. And then on the other hand, we're also facing some pretty severe threats in the field of medicine. So my fascination with drug resistance didn't stop in high school. I have been fascinated with the ways that bacteria evolve resistance to our antibiotics ever since then. And we know today that over 700,000 deaths occur every year due to antimicrobial resistant infections. And by mid-century, this is estimated to reach 10 million per year. As a point of reference, that's 5 times per year the number of deaths that we had in the first year of COVID-19. This threat will undermine modern medicine as we know it today. And for me, the line is so clear that the health of our planet is the critical line that will be tied to the health of humanity. And yet somehow we seem to ignore that. So what can we do as scientists, as someone that teaches future scientists and future physicians and future guardians of our environment? It all starts with this understanding of the role of plants in the solution, and also the role that this traditional knowledge can really play in serving in helping us to understand how to find better balance between planet health and human health. In my laboratory, we take a very interdisciplinary approach to understanding how to investigate these botanical medicines. We start with different lines of evidence. So in some cases, this evidence might be based in things like ethnobotanical knowledge. These are practices that people are currently engaging in for their health care. And then we also look at historic records, going back centuries in some cases, to things that are written in Latin to better understand how some of these species were used in the past. We have botanists on our team from the Emory herbarium that authenticate and identify the species that we collect in the wild. In the phytochemistry lab, we have chemists that analyze the chemical compositions of these mixtures. A single plant tissue, like a leaf, can actually contain hundreds of unique molecules. And so there's a lot of intricate chemistry that has to go into understanding how these work. In our microbiology and dermatology lab, we have scientists that are focused in the field of microbiology and pharmacology, who look into the ways that these plants work on different disease systems, whether it's antibiotic-resistant bacteria or super fungi that are wreaking havoc among our cancer patients, or in our most recent work on COVID-19. We then go through these processes of basically teasing apart the needles in the haystack to better understand which molecules are most responsible for these activities. And then through collaborations, we work to optimize these molecules in the hopes of pushing them further and further along the pathway towards drug development. Now, all of this, again, begins with people. It begins with human knowledge, and it begins with a respect for that human knowledge. We adhere to strict rules for ethical engagement with local communities, and these are long-term engagements. These are not simple helicopter in and out kinds of collaborations that we have with these communities or with the scientists in these local that work in these countries. The areas that we work are highlighted with these stars shown on the map. The areas in brown are the 36 global hotspots of terrestrial biodiversity. These are regions of the world where you have the greatest level of diversity of life. And as a result, you have the greatest level of diversity of chemistry within those bodies of life. And so we work through a network of collaborators, training students in these countries, working with different scientists in these countries, and going out and collecting ourselves plants in these countries in order to build a large database for our biological testing. I'll show you some pictures from different field sites. And in my book, I take you on a journey. The book is part travelogue in a way, because I really try and take readers on a journey of what it was to become a scientist. For me, it all began in the Amazon, and then it jumped over to a remote village in southern Italy. It was an ethnic minority village of Albanian immigrants that came to the South 5 centuries ago. And while I was there studying the traditional uses of wild foods, I also became very interested in ritual uses of plants for healing. And this is another healer that I worked with, Zia Elena, who healed people from around many different communities. And she was especially specialized in treating different forms of skin disease. And learning from her, I became more and more interested in dermatologic conditions. And again, this ties to my own personal story with skin infections early in my life. While I was in Italy, life happened. I met a wonderful man. We got married. We had a kid. In the meantime, I started graduate school. And so in the book, I also tell this story of what it's like to kind of try and balance real life as a real human trying to do science and balancing love and marriage and children along. And my kids have been on many of the trips that we go on. I mean, part of my job at Emory is to lead these expeditions to go out and find new plants. And I faced some challenges, not only as an amputee, but also in having children in the field. And so in the book, I talk about some of the problem solving things that we try, whether it's renting a pack of donkeys or an airboat or whatever mode of transportation can get us closer to the places where we're trying to arrive. We also work here closer to home, actually, in one of these amazing longleaf pine habitats. This is actually a habitat that was preserved by Robert Woodruff. And if that name sounds familiar from Woodruff Library, that is the same man. He was the former president of Coca-Cola and left 30,000 acres in trust for ecological research here in the southern part of the state. And so we've been so fortunate to have a really long-lasting collaboration with them. You know, and I also am very involved in social media and trying to communicate science. And, you know, this is one of those things where I always start my day with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy. But the reality of the day is it's pretty exhausting, the work that I do. And one of my friends snapped this photo of me. I'm like, oh, that's an awful picture. And they said, no, you need to show this to people, because it shows the reality of the kind of work that I do. I mean, it's not easy, the work that I do as an amputee in sometimes rough areas of the field. This is a bit of an easier area on a paved path, but there are definitely times when it gets pretty difficult. But at the same time, I've traveled to such amazing places. I've met such amazing people that have tremendous knowledge of how to use their environments as a resource for food and medicine, whether it's in Albania or whether it's in Italy or in the Amazon or in many of the other places that we've worked. I found that teamwork is really essential in all these expeditions. And when I talk about teamwork, it's not just about other PhD scientists and faculty that I work with, like these gentlemen in Italy, but it's also my students at Emory. This is from a trip that we took to South Florida, working with local cattle ranchers to explore the plants on some of the thousands of acres that they hold in the state. And so today in the lab, we have this kind of four-pronged approach of field research, the herbarium, which serves as kind of a museum type quality preservation of plants, the phytochemistry lab, where we explore the chemistry of these plants, and then the microbiology and dermatology lab, where we explore their potential medicinal and pharmacological activities. We've compiled over 700 species, more than 2,000 botanical and fungal extracts that are unique in the world. And this library is helping us to find new solutions for ever more important problems, especially in the realm of infectious disease. And I'll end with this, just this emphasis on how very important it's been to bring together these different disciplines in our approach. I talk about this a lot in the book. I think the future of science really has to be multidisciplinary. We have to open ourselves up beyond the sciences to incorporate the humanities and bring in many different perspectives into our work. And above all, we have to be respectful not only of the earth and all that nature has to offer, but also to the knowledge keepers that really help to preserve these amazing resources. So I thank you all for your attention. I'll point you to some resources. We have the book, The Plant Hunter, which I think they've provided a link to. You can follow me on social media. I have a YouTube channel if you're interested in some free educational content in the field of ethnobotany. I also have a podcast, Foodie Pharmacology, which really explores that links between food and medicine. And if you are by any chance moved to help support our research, this funding goes directly towards our projects and especially towards the training of the next generation of scientists. You can access our special Emory link through donate.ethnobotanica.us. Thank you all for your attention. I'm excited to take questions and talk with Naomi, one of my former students.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Quave, for that. I learn something new about you every time I talk to you. Goes on. It's wonderful to be here. I was sort of laughing as I was reading the book because it felt like a fictional story. And I was like, is she going to get the grant? And then I remember that I know you and I did work at the lab. You know, so you've clearly lived such a vibrant and just really special life. And I just wanted to start on a lighter question of how does it feel to have put this all together? You know, reflect on the experience of putting the book together. Where does that leave you now? And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I mean, I finished the book in a dark time because it was in the middle of the pandemic, but it just feels wonderful to be able to get the story out. I've gotten so many amazing emails from people that are in the sciences or are passionate about nature, and they found something that resonated with them in the book. And so that's been really rewarding for me. I mean, in a way, I wrote this book for my younger self. Like, it's going to be okay. It's not been an easy journey to get to where I'm at. But I think that there's just so much that we have out there to explore, and I'm eager to continue in that.
Yes, that certainly has not been easy. And, you know, it's funny, you mentioned this in your presentation with that photo comparison, and I appreciate that because you're so, you know, at once in the book, you're so vulnerable about what you experience and how challenging it is, but also you show that you can do it. You know, and I'm curious what advice you have for scientists who are struggling, mothers who are struggling, folks with disabilities who are struggling, you know, being very real and not just having a toxic positivity, but what were some of the things or people that helped you get through?
Yeah. I mean, the book is very open. Like, you're right, I don't hold anything back in it. And I think that, you know, for me, I think having those social networks was so important. Having friends and colleagues that could be allies, that could, you know, I could connect with, were so important. And I think that's something that everybody can identify with, is having that group of people to bring your ideas to, that you can bounce ideas off of. You know, in the sciences, we talk a lot about mentors, and mentors are incredibly important. I've been so fortunate to have, you know, amazing mentors, not only in the traditional sense, like with my academic mentors at Emory, including Dr. Lample, who mentored me as a student and is, you know, still plays such an incredibly important role in my life as my boss in the Center for the Study of Human Health. But also those mentors I've met through life's experiences. And if there's one thing I like to advise my students to do is to get out there and experience something. College is a place to really gain that amazing fire and quest for knowledge and fill up that knowledge trough. But after that, you've got to go out and really see what's out there in the world that makes you excited. And that can really help you on the next steps.
I love that. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, my time in your lab, we did our retreat as a camping trip. So I think that speaks volumes to the way that we see the world. And it was amazing. I remember walking, we'd like be on a hike and every 5 seconds we'd stop and be like, that's this, that's that.
It's the longest hike. It never stops because everybody like looking at plants.
Right. We only went 2 miles. Yeah. But on that note, I think it's really funny. You mentioned ethereal Jane early on in your book, and that resonates with me so deeply. I feel like we all know an ethereal Jane, someone who's just like, it's natural, go for it, especially now living in the Bay Area. And so when you talk about exploring, but also, how do you balance that with the concept that nature isn't always safe, and how do you investigate the world and get out there while also keeping yourself safe and finding that balance?
Yeah, this is a really serious challenge for anyone that's been on an expedition or done field work before. I mean, every place has its own unique challenges, whether it's some sort of crazy infectious disease you want to be careful of, or, large reptiles that might eat you. You have to be really thoughtful about the ways that you go out into nature. I mean, I think for me, I was very lucky in the fact that I was raised in a very rural, kind of wild part of Southwest Florida. My dad is in land clearing. And so as a kid, my summer job was often working with him in the swamps, as he plows down trees, which is kind of ironic today. I'm all about saving the trees. But I was introduced to that kind of other side of nature from a very young age, and was always taught to respect nature, to understand that nature is beautiful, but it can also be deadly. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I try and teach my students is, in classes, as you were also a student in classes, not everything in nature is safe. There are lots of things that, including plants that are quite deadly. And even those plants that are medicinal can be deadly if taken in the wrong context or in the wrong dose.
Right. Yeah, I will never forget Digitalis purpurea. That will be in my brain until I die. And I never pass up an opportunity to point it out when I'm walking with someone. There's something about knowing the genus and species and family of a plant that makes you feel so intelligent. I don't know, I was reflecting on that. I was like, why do I feel so smart knowing that? And I wonder if it's just because it's like a truth of the world. Your book is called Plant Hunter, and it's because you're making discoveries. We're not creating these, you're finding them, and it sort of unlocks a truth. I don't know if that resonates with you at all, but anytime I have that knowledge, it feels special compared to other,
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, and I think that extends also to indigenous language. When you have a name for a species, and it's not just that you have the name of Digitalis purpurea, which, by the way, is the foxglove plant for anyone that's not like up on their Latin game right now. But it's not just the name of the plant. It's also that you knew it's important in medicine, and you also knew of its power that could also kill, that it could heal and it could kill if taken in the wrong way. And I think, the same can be said for those of indigenous wisdom that know which plants in the forest might be toxic actually, but that you can transform them into something that's edible or medicinal through different processing through boiling it or fermenting it or whatever way. I mean, there's power in knowledge, and there's a sense of grounding yourself in your environment. Because for me, I once had this journalist write about, he opened up a story about my work and say, she greets the plants, she says, oh, hello. And I'm like, do I do that? Oh, I do that. I do. I say hello to the plants I recognize on my walks, because for me, it is like recognizing something that's very near and dear to my heart. And so it just feels natural to greet them as I encounter them.
Yeah, they're your friends. I love it.
Yeah.
And I say good morning to my plants every day. So I'm happy to say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because and maybe the world is changing. Like, I'm someone who gets really excited when I find out that something is based or really, comes from plants. And I think that that maybe is changing and people are more open to that, more Janes perhaps in the world. But why do you think pharmaceutical companies have actively chosen to take that history out of their work? Like, why did I have to take your class to find out that aspirin derived from willow? You know, why do they decide? Why do you think that'll get back in at some point?
You know, I'm not sure why. All I know is that it's true that today in medical education, even in pharmacy education, our students aren't being taught about the origins of many of our drugs. And I think that's a shame because I think it's important to understand the origins of medicine, because through understanding that history, only then can we really make informed decisions about the future of medicine. And so that's another big reason I wrote the book, because I would say, hey, you know, there's this great polarization or this concept of polarization between modern medicine and traditional medicine. And I think one of the messages I was trying to get across in the book is that these are not polarized opposites, that they're actually intertwined. And the modern medicine is built on the backbone of traditional medicine and all the gifts that it's brought to us.
Right. No, exactly. And I think when you speak about indigenous language and traditional ecological knowledge, the TEK, you know, it seems like those are quite intertwined. But as you mentioned, climate change is posing a huge risk.
Yes.
I would love to hear more about, you know, specifically how that's posing a risk, both to the plant life and maybe also the actual knowledge transfer from generation to generation.
Yeah, I mean, climate change, I mean, I talked about antibiotic resistance as being the major threat to medicine. Climate change is the major threat to planetary health right now. I mean, there have been some amazing scientists that have done just incredible work, especially out of the Missouri Botanical Garden, looking at, you know, knowledge of plants and use of plants in the Himalayas, for example. You know, what they find is that after a while, you know, plants actually can move up the mountain, right, as the climate warms, but after a while you run out of mountain. And it's like, how are we going to safeguard some of these species, especially considering that we really only use a very tiny fraction of all plant life for our food systems. So we really need to study these, to conserve them, to think about ways to save them, because you know, these are the species that may be represent the future of food, the future of medicine, the future of textiles. I mean, there's just so much that's gone unstudied, and we have a lot of work to do.
Right. Yeah, I was just reflecting on that. Like, how do you conserve what you don't even know you need to conserve? It's sort of an overwhelming fact to really sink your teeth into. It's quite scary. I mean, I'm sure you've met people all over the world doing their own conservation. And I'm curious, you know, from like the perspective of someone like me, what can we do to help that? Is there anything we can do from home if we're not ethnobotanists, you know, if we're not engaged?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're all familiar with these concepts around fair trade, coffee, and like and these kind of ideas. On the other hand, there's a growing movement that I've seen that's starting to grow in the dietary supplements market to think about sustainable trade of herbs. A lot of the botanicals that you get over the counter as your supplements are wild crafted. There are many that are cultivated, but they're actually a good deal of them are wild crafted because they're not suitable for cultivation. And these are the species that are under greatest risk of you know, of being over harvested and pushed towards endangerment and even extinction. And at the same time, these are the species that local people need for their own medicine. So I would say that you can definitely make purchasing power to look for brands that are focusing on sustainable harvest of these wild species. And you can also do a lot at home. I say the place to start is in your own backyard. You don't have to travel to the Amazon to get an appreciation of nature. Start in your own neighborhood. You know, learn about the names of the trees or the herbs and different plants you encounter on your neighborhood walks, and that's a great place to start.
Oh, so we're not going to all go to the Amazon after this?
I mean, if you can, you should definitely go because it's pretty amazing.
Adding it to the list. Well, one final question for me, and then I'll open it up to the others. I could ask you a million, but I guess in the theme of an epic, we'll end where we started. At the start of the book, you talk about how your mom was instructed very intentionally by doctors not to remove your bandage, but she had an intuition, and she did, and she was right. And I'm really curious about how you feel in regards to sort of like a mother's intuition and just a human intuition and its place in science. You know, I feel like it's interdisciplinary just in the way that you do everything else, and sort of how you feel about those two worlds coming together, because that is a big part of traditional knowledge, I believe.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I mean, I think that the way that I approach life, whether that's in science or in my home, is like I try to intentionally approach it with a very open mind. And so I talk in the book about getting out of this concept of in the box, outside the box. I think we can't have real paradigm shifts in our understanding of nature and our understanding of medicine until we step outside of a world where there even is a box. And, you know, it seems so strange to think that once upon a time, people had no concept that there were microorganisms in the world, that you could transfer disease to these little tiny creatures that no one could see with the naked eye. And that seems like it was such a radical idea at the time. And now it's like just everyone knows that. I think there's so many lessons like that that are still out there, and maybe science leads us to them. Maybe part intuition will lead us to them. But I think having that open mind is key.
Love that. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I will be selfless and open it up to others. We have a question from the audience. You know, you discussed a little bit about the Nagoya protocol and benefit sharing. We have a question that asks, what are some of the ways you've gone about building trust in the field with the communities who may be potentially wary of outsiders? And this person's research, building trust, has been really important in gathering true and in-depth information. And they'd love to hear about how you go about this.
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think it starts with a real commitment to collaboration. The work in the communities that I've worked with, you know, over time, in some cases, I've been visiting the same communities over 20 years. So this is not a helicopter in and out kind of situation. It also is really important, I think, to intentionally involve local scientists and to build true collaborations with those scientists that can lead towards research capacity building in those different research centers. So some of the things that we've done on the community level is, you know, number one is we always ask, what does the community want in return? In addition to community, you know, approval, individual approval of a participation, it's what do they want in return? And each community may want something different, but in general, in most cases, they want to have the knowledge that we've collated provided back to them in a way that's accessible to them. So either it's in a booklet that's in the local language, in some cases it's a workshop, in some cases it's a botanical garden that they can use to teach their children about the plants, but it's really a celebration of knowledge. And then on the scientific level of working with local scientists, we've done a lot to train foreign scientists in the lab. We've done a lot to work towards applying for collaborative grants that bring more funding that would otherwise be inaccessible to those universities from the US. So looking at ways to tap into funds from the National Academies of Science or the State Department, or different mechanisms where we can not only conduct these research studies, but also help them purchase the equipment that they greatly need in their universities.
That's great. Yeah. And I remember talking about that in class, like how you are really intentional about it. It's not just a check and thank you. It's like an actual true collaboration. Another audience member asks, and they say first, hi, Dr. Quave. You all had met a few years ago at the Botanical Garden at an Emory Creative Alumni event. You were so gracious to provide a tour for their group. What are your top new places you hope for you and or your team to visit next?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I'm really itching to get out back into the field. I haven't been doing field research for about 30 months. I'm counting the days. So I'm actually going back to Kosovo next week. It'll be my first kind of return to the field as part of our research capacity building mission funded by the National Academy of Sciences through this peer mechanism. And we're going to be training local scientists in how to do plant DNA analysis and also how to do some chemical analysis of their local plants. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get out into the field also and look at some cool plants. Although it's winter right now, there's not going to be, you know, not quite the same as a summer expedition, but it'll be nice to get back out in nature. We have some proposals in collaboration with folks in Egypt based out of Cairo. So I'm hoping to do some oasis work in the next year or so. We'll see. I mean, a lot of this is really dependent on where we're able to get the funding secured. We have collaborators in Colombia we're also working with actively. So we're trying to really get a number of these projects going. And the exciting thing I think about this phase of my career is that I may not actually be able to make it to all these field sites, but my team will. And I think that's really cool to be able to have team members spread across the globe.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, from what it sounds like in your book, your kids are only a few years away from hopping on that plane as well. So I remember them foraging on our camping trip. Well, quite a related question as a follow-up. Someone asks, what is your dream scenario for the long-term future of your lab at Emory, both in terms of grant money and then also scientific goals and discoveries?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to do pie in the sky kind of dream, I mean, I would love to someday have a center dedicated to biodiversity conservation and to really this intersection of human health and planetary health. I would envision a global network of scientists based in these different countries where we have these terrestrial hotspots of biodiversity. And I failed to mention earlier in the talk that to become a terrestrial hotspot of biodiversity, you need to have 500 endemic species. So these are species that are only found in that part of the world, and 70% of the native vegetation has to be under risk. And so these are places that have high diversity and yet are also under risk. So for me, I mean, this is the place to be working at the interface of planetary health and human health. And that's kind of my big pie in the sky dream, that we can push something like that forward.
That would be amazing. I can't wait to see that. And in terms of the modern medicine world embracing ethnobotany, if at all, how has it transitioned, from writing the book to now, and where do you see this going in the future?
I mean, I've seen over the course of my career a slow opening acceptance of the importance of natural products, not just from plants, but from other organisms as well, to medicine. I think in a lot of these cases, when you're trying to push new ideas, it really takes a number of success stories to convince people. And so that's what I'm focusing on now. We have a number of patented discoveries that I think could make real impact in improving the lives of patients with atopic dermatitis or eczema. We've also made some really important headway on COVID-19, and also with our fungal infections. So, we have a number of projects in the hopper, and I think as these make their way closer towards that drug development pipeline, that we'll be able to have more to stand behind and really start to help open the eyes of people to the real potential of these plants.
I mean, and as you mentioned, it takes funding to do this. And someone asks, well, someone first thanks you for the knowledge gained through your research, because it's incredibly valuable to the scientific community. And they asked, do you see a problem or challenge with some scientific information becoming proprietary depending on who funds it? And if so, do you think that inhibits the research process or progress?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you're industry funded, you can have some restrictions on intellectual property. Within government funding, there's more of a normal process. Philanthropic funding is more of a normal process. It is important to protect intellectual property because drugs just realistically won't ever get developed unless there is IP built around them. But at the same time, I think you can do this in an ethical way that's with the Nagoya Protocol by ensuring that there are agreements in place with communities so that if there is something that does end up generating revenue down the road, that the benefits of that revenue also return to those communities and to that country. So I think, there's definitely ways to do that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thoughtfully. And you talked a little bit about some of your experiences with folks in the field and some experiences with various plants, both hallucinogenic and non. And this question relates to that. It says that you've worked with a lot of mentors along the way. Some were grounded in the scientific world and others in the spiritual world. How do you combine these two worlds in your work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the importance there is that I value them both equally. If that, I think that, again, going back to that appreciation for multidisciplinary approaches, and it may sound kind of strange that I can speak with someone who believes they plants and they communicate with plants, and that's what teaches them how to treat patients. At the same time, we're doing hardcore, super advanced chemistry, using multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment. But for me, I think it's all part of the same spectrum of intersecting of really, learning how to speak the language of nature. I think if that's that we're really trying to do is we're trying to learn that language And this language that indigenous people have spoken for a very long time, this ability to detect and connect with different species. And we're just doing it now today with these different tools. So yeah, I think there's huge value in many different types of mentors.
That makes sense. I feel like that is so, what you're saying is exactly testament in your lab. You know, you start at this station where you have bags of plants and blenders, and then you move all the way up to this like very expensive, I assume, lyophilizer and rotovap. And the transition of that feels, you know, exactly concurrent with what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, it's just part of the magic. And speaking of, someone asked, of all of the plants that you have studied, this is probably a challenging question, which one would you say is most magical? And what about the most dangerous?
Oh, wow. Most magical. Well, I mean, if we're going to talk about magic and like the sense of like spiritual beliefs around plants, I'm really fascinated with Ruta graveolens in the Mediterranean. This is not a psychedelic. But it is a plant that's thought to heal a number of spiritual diseases, and it's very, very much revered by healers in that area, and yet still very understudied. We know that it's rich in a number of alkaloids, so there might be some interesting, you know, potential like neurologic or neurotargeting compounds, but haven't really been studied. I mean, I've certainly had opportunities to work with people that use psychedelic plants as part of their medical practice, but I'm by no means an expert in that particular area of pharmacology. My interests have been more focused in kind of, you know, infectious disease, inflammatory disease. When it comes to the most dangerous, maybe I would say, you know, there have definitely been very deadly poisonous plants I've encountered. You know, I think what's one of the scenes I describe in the book that was so incredibly special to me when I was first experiencing, you know, the ways that plants were used in the Amazon is this encounter with a poison dart gun. So this blowgun that has poison darts, and this contains the darts are dipped into a tar or resin of plants that has a active compound known as tuberculin, which if you're poked by it, even accidentally, you can die because it basically shuts down, you know, your ability of your diaphragm to move. So you can undergo artificial respiration until you like come out of it, but it's pretty, I don't know. So that's probably the coolest plant that I've touched and worked with, and actually have hanging in my office.
I was going to say that, which is, it's so cool that it's right there. I also remember you showing a video in class of a monkey that I think had suffered the effects either of that or another plant, and that will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And on that note, you know, I wish folks on this call who haven't had the opportunity to take your class could see, but you really do make the classes, you know, very engaged. I mean, I remember we'd like try out different laxative and drink it, but we'd, you know, look at it in a water bottle, and you passed out the various cleaning sticks for teeth. We experienced with kava, you know, and I'm curious, I know that you didn't start out in this path as a teacher, but what's that journey been like to become a professor as well as a scientist and share that knowledge with both, I guess, your students in the lab and in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy working with students. I think, you know, sometimes I get asked, why aren't you in industry? Why don't you just go to pharma?
Right.
You know, but I love working with students. I love seeing the light bulb go off and having that aha moment in the classroom, because that's so special. And my hope is that, yes, that students will walk away and have a new appreciation for all these amazing resources. And my greatest hope is that they'll be inspired by something I teach in class and go off and start a whole new industry that really, you know, whether it's for oral care or, you know, plant-based meats, or I don't know, something really cool that could change the world, because I think that the students that I teach are the kind of students that can change the world. Yeah, so that's why I continue to teach.
Perfect. I love that. And a last question from the audience, and perfect segue. What advice would you give to young girls and women who are interested in getting into a STEM field but might be intimidated due to the male dominance in the field?
Yeah, this was probably the hardest chapter for me to write in my book. It's the chapter called Billy Fell Off the Swings. This is like my story of bullying in childhood, and then some of the challenges, the very real challenges I've come up against. as a woman in science, I mean, and especially as a woman in science who works in a somewhat fringe or considered to be fringe field, um, I would say, you know, it's so important again to have mentors. It's important to have sponsors, people that will maybe aren't in that direct mentorship relationship, but like are the ones that say, you know what, this she's going to be perfect for this role. They're the ones that put your name in the hat. And then you have your kind of your tribe of colleagues that you can that have similar shared experiences that you can talk with. I mean, I think it's a combination of all of those different things that can help you get through things. And you know, things are definitely changing. I mean, luckily we're not subjected to the same types of issues that Rosalind Franklin was subjected to with Watson, and I write about that and as well. um, but there are other very real challenges, and we're becoming more and more aware of it. I think that it's something that's more open for discussion. And I think that in order to make real change, lasting change, is we've got to promote more women to positions of leadership. There aren't nearly enough women leaders as chairs of departments or as deans or in positions of power. And I see that changing, and that gives me a lot of hope. That gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, and you sharing their stories in the book is another great step. Well, that is all the time we have. Thank you so much,
Great.
Dr. for the book, and congratulations, and for the questions. It's been really great to reconnect and just
Thanks.
hear all about your life.
It's been great to see you. It just feels like the other day you were in my class. So how did all these years by?
I'll pop back over anytime. And I'll think of you when I'm building my garden out. We have a plan this weekend. I will bring it back to Nicole for closing, and thank you everyone for your questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us, participating in tonight's program. Please help me give a silent round of applause and thank you to Dr. Cassandra Quave and Naomi Maisel for sharing their experiences with us tonight. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Quave's work and pick up a copy of The Plant Hunter yourself, visit cassandraquave.com. We will also share a donation link in our follow-up email to allow you to support the incredible work of the Quave Research Group here at Emory. You will also receive a link to complete a short survey following the event, so please be sure to take a few minutes and share your feedback with us. On behalf of the Emory Alumni Association and the Emory Alumni and Environmental and Bay Area Networks, we want to thank you again for learning with us. Have a great evening.